Welcome back to Unauthorized Opinions, UOPod.com, patreon.com/UOPod. Another week in the books, another week on the horizon, and the battle never stops, of course. I was hanging with my friend last night, who will remain nameless, and he said, I'm so sick of the debate around men and women in sports. I'm so sick of hearing about it, and I said, you know what, mystery friend of Andrew's, why? I'm going to keep writing and talking about it until the battle is won. Until people like Neil deGrasse Tyson concede that they were wrong about this. Now, we're going to be waiting a long time for that, just like we're going to be waiting for the admittance from people that they were wrong about COVID and the vaccines and about Biden and all this stuff. About Kamala. About Mayor Pete and the electric car chargers, all that stuff. But if you've been following this at all, this men versus women in sports, men and women's sports, all that wonderful stuff that we get flagged on Spotify for being mean, which happened a few weeks ago. If you've been following this at all, you've heard probably Neil deGrasse Tyson, astute, renowned astrophysicist, who for some reason has injected himself into this conversation. Or maybe he was just asked about it, he gave a horrible answer, and people want to know why he gave that answer, but he's not backing down. And this, I believe, originated on the Trigonometry podcast, where he had this argument where he said, well, maybe we should just, instead of having men and women compete in separate categories, we categorize it by hormones. And he said this months ago. And he's still saying it, even though he says he's just making it up as he goes along. Maybe you shouldn't talk about it if you are just going to make it up. I mean, you're not a comedian. You don't have the artistic integrity that us podcasters have. The artistic license, I should say. But he goes on Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan challenges him on this. And he is still not backing down on his claim that, you know, people should be separated by gender. He's not backing down on his claim that they should be separated perhaps differently by hormone level or something like that instead of gender. He sees the separation of sports by gender as arbitrary, let's say, or as typical as weight classes, which is not. It's completely different, obviously, because, you know, it's hard to even explain his position, but he believes that, you know, men and women should basically be able to compete at the same weight classes, which you will see him say here on Piers Morgan, and he thinks that's an innocuous claim, just as if, you know, as long as the hormone levels, the testosterone levels are matching up, there can be no advantage. So we're going to pick this apart a little bit, and we're going to see what he says. There's some ridiculous things in here. Let's take a listen.
What I see is sports is on the frontier of how to handle this frontier of people who are trans. It's on the frontier of how to resolve that. And I'm making this up now. Imagine the future of sports does not distinguish sex. It distinguishes and sorts people by hormone ratio.
And again, he's not making this up right now. He made this up, arguably, when he actually made it up, was months and months ago. Might have even been as far back as March. I'll give him August because everything gets so mushed together. At least a few months have gone by where he first suggested this.
I'm making this up, but imagine that if that were the case. That would be interesting. You get a hormone test, you're in this range, and then you compete against other people with the same range of hormones.
That's ridiculous.
That's
Neil, that is ridiculous.
No, it's not. I'll tell you why it's not ridiculous.
You're going to give every single person in sport a hormone test.
Hold on. I used to wrestle. And wrestling, there are people who weigh, sorry, I'm using pounds here, 125 pounds, right on up to 240 pounds. They don't wrestle each other. The entire sport separates people so that the contest is interesting.
Yeah.
And so the people of the same weight wrestle each other, and that is the contest.
But if Floyd Mayweather...
I don't know if that's how it will land.
Hang on, Neil. If Floyd Mayweather fought a woman boxer, a female woman boxer, who was the same weight division, he would annihilate her. That's why we don't let it happen. And in fact, in the Paris Olympics, the winner of one of the women's boxing competitions, one of the
Piers,
females
that's
who
not what I
took
was
her
talking
on.
about.
But yeah, but my point is that I just think that if you don't mind me saying, I say this respectfully because I love you. But it just seems to me like you've dug yourself into a slight hole on this issue, and you're trying to get out of it. And now you're suggesting slightly mad theories.
Piers Morgan's completely right on this, and we know on this program we don't agree with him all the time, just probably 70% of the time or 60% of the time. Neil deGrasse Tyson says it isn't ridiculous to just say we should measure people by their hormone levels at the time. You know, that doesn't even work for men against men, because if somebody's on HGH and they grow to the size of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, how big he got, or Barry Bonds, how big he got, now all of a sudden their entire frame is bigger, their entire body is bigger, their skull grows. Now they're able to carry more muscle mass. That's already an advantage. And then if they go back down to the testosterone levels they were before, they are now still at an advantage. Same thing with steroids. People in fighting and MMA will go and they will take time off. They will do steroids to gain more muscle mass. Testosterone replacement therapy, get to back to where they were, and then come off of it. Now, there's an argument to be made for that versus human growth hormones, which physically makes you a larger person by stature. But it's already things that aren't allowed for male versus male competitions. And Neil deGrasse Tyson does things like, I used to wrestle back in the 70s or whenever it was. Obviously, this guy doesn't pay any attention to sports. And I'm not saying that as a dig. I'm saying he's dedicated his life to his trade, which is alleged sciences. And now he's like, I have the answer for sports. And he can say again that he's making it up now, but he hasn't. He's been saying this for months. And the idea that it's just down to a hormone test and people who are the same weight class is completely ridiculous. If you take a man who's 125 pounds in MMA, which is a flyweight, he can easily beat the biggest weight class of women, which at this point is 145 pounds. A 20-pound weight difference, the woman's going to lose pretty much every time. Maybe not against a random guy off the street of 125 pounds, but any professional 125-pound male fighter is going to more than likely beat any professional 145 female fighter. And that's why they don't do this. You can do it any way you want. It seems to me in sports, the equivalent to an adult woman versus a male athlete, it's right around 15 years old, 13, 14, 15. Why do I say that? Because we have several examples. We've had it in hockey. We've had it in soccer predominantly. We've had 14-year-olds, I believe, in both soccer and hockey go out and defeat professional women's teams, national teams as well. And I believe we've had it 15 and 16 and 17-year-old in soccer. So that appears to me to be the athletic equivalent. After a guy goes through puberty and, you know, he plays lots of sports, he's usually better at the sport than the women are. You've got guys who are 17, 16 years old in high school that can dunk. Go watch any high school basketball highlights. As soon as you get to high school, kids are dunking. Some kids can dunk in grade 8. However, you can go to the WNBA, the highest level of professional women's basketball, and like 3 girls can dunk. So that's just a small example of the athleticism difference. And Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, well, we could just hormone test everybody in the sport and do it that way to prove this wild claim that there's no unfair advantage for men to be in women's sports. The women can already play in men's sports, by the way. If a woman's good enough, she can come play in the man's sport. It almost never happens. It's never happened for longer than a bit. The only thing it's happened successfully in is racing, because there's not you're driving a car. But it's never going to happen in tennis. It's never going to happen in hockey. It happened in hockey for like a couple preseason games, and the girl got lit up, by the way. There was a Canadian women's hockey player in Division 3 hockey in Finland. That's about as high as it goes. So this idea that there is an advantage isn't an advantage, and we need to go above and beyond to prove that there's no advantage is ridiculous. It's just men versus women. Let's see what else he tried to argue here.
Whereas the science to me is obvious. You've already given the best argument I've heard for why we separate the sexes.
Hold on. You misquoted me in this very interview. What I said was the idea of creating categories within a sport, splitting them in the example I gave, which I just made it up, like hormone ratios, is not fundamentally weird compared to dividing wrestlers by weight.
No,
because
it is.
the only
it
reason
is.
why you
I'm
do
going to
this
respond.
is to make an interesting contest.
No, Neil, you're wrong.
And so you said Floyd Mayweather fight. Hold on.
You're
you
wrong.
said Floyd Mayweather.
You're not allowing for
and
the superior male biology when it comes to lung capacity, stamina, to body mass, to muscle mass, all those things. If you just take one criteria of hormones, you're not allowing all that. I'll give an example. Caitlyn Jenner, who obviously... hang on. I'm going to finish my point. Let me finish my point. Caitlyn Jenner was a Olympic...
Before we end to Caitlyn Jenner here, which is Bruce Jenner, the idea that hormone tests and equal hormones between a man and a woman is this arbitrary weight classes is ridiculous, because within male athletics, you might get a 145-pound man that can beat a 155-pound man. You might get a 205-pounder, a light heavyweight, who can beat a guy who's 230, a heavyweight. It could happen. 170 versus 185 is a big gap. 205 versus 225 is a bigger gap, but it's also at a higher rate. So 135 could probably beat a 155, maybe. There are some really thin and tall. What am I getting here? They're very thin and tall. I'm getting errors on my screen. MMA fighters who are 135 pounds, let's say, and they could still compete against a 155-pounder because they've got the length and the reach. That would happen rarely because the weight is such an advantage. However, there are no 135-pound women that could compete against even a 145-pound man or even a 135-pound man, the same weight class. So it's not as arbitrary. The weight class is not as arbitrary. The weight class is within the gender, and it's a huge advantage on its own. When you add gender in that, it's like a multiplier. You're adding this crazy advantage to the athlete. Now let's hear what he's got to say about Caitlyn Jenner.
Male decathlon gold medal winner. Caitlyn is a big golf fan. And when she started playing golf after she transitioned, she was allowed to play off the women's tees, which are 50 yards further than the men's tees. And she quickly realized that she was still smashing it 300 yards down, and obviously was then beating all the women that she played. So she now plays back off the male tees because her biology is that of a man. And I feel that was the most honest way to deal with it. I also feel that if you want to have a separate category, have a trans category. Or have trans women compete against men, which is their biology. Isn't that the scientific way to resolve this?
I don't have a solution. What I started this section of the conversation by saying that how you handle trans athletes is a frontier in sports that does not yet have a full solution. And I made up an example, like maybe you could divide people by hormones. I don't know if that would work physiologically, but at the end of the day, we watch sporting events because they are competitively interesting. And so something's going to have to get resolved there, and I don't have that solution.
Okay, he doesn't have the solution now, even though he's argued for the same idea for months now. Completely cowardly argument, completely backs out of it once he's proven even slightly wrong, says, I don't even know. I'll just argue this point for months, but I don't even know. And obviously, my political alignments prevent me from admitting I'm wrong about this. Piers Morgan, on the other hand, saying Caitlyn Jenner is a male, but calling him a she. I don't know if that's because he's just in England or because he knows that Bruce Jenner can kick his ass. Aside from that, he brings up another point about having an all-trans league, and no one will watch this besides a couple random YouTube highlights because there's not even people watching women's leagues, and all you're going to get is men who can't compete in men's athletics who are now fighting each other dressed as women. It's going to be for perverts only to view. I don't know. It will do slightly better than like minor league sports, maybe because there's the freakiness factor of it, but it's going to be slightly more competitive. Like, I don't even know, like, who are all these trans athletes? Is there enough of them? Would they wouldn't be trans. A guy who's good enough to play a professional sport wouldn't be trans. Like, you can throw Caitlyn Jenner, but this is 20 years or so, or however long, 25, 30 years after he competed in the Olympics, and then he had to live through the Kardashians and everything. That's a completely unique scenario. There aren't any professional level athletes who are trans. It's just not a thing. So they would be competing at a level that's much worse than top tier professional. And then people would watch it once and be like, that's crazy and weird. But at this point, I'm just watching men in drag or men with breast implants fight each other, and that's weird. And you'd stop watching. And it's the same reason there are no, women's soccer video games, women's hockey video games, and they have to piggyback onto the men's out of a charity. That's why the WNBA can't survive on its own. People don't actually want to watch these things. They'll watch it out of novelty. Maybe they'll watch the World Cup final for women or the Olympics for women, which is fine, but people are not consistently watching these things. People are not consistently watching them at the level that they watch the men's sport, and we have to hear people come out here and make excuses for it. And I know that's not what Piers is trying to do, but an all-trans league isn't going to work because there isn't an audience for it. There isn't an audience for a women's hockey video game because it's not going to work. But their argument will be, not Piers's, but other people's arguments will be, well, it's wonderful and it's so great that we wanted to include it. But it's so not wonderful and so not great that it can't sustain its own game, because if it could, you would make a separate video game for the WNBA and celebrate your two different verticals of profit here. But that never happens because it doesn't have the actual audience. So on one hand, we're kidding ourselves with this whole debate of people, let's make this trans league. But I understand that people are saying that because they probably know it would never work, and to keep the men out of the women's sports. Now, Neil deGrasse Tyson has this bit here that he's doing, but increasingly we're seeing women across the world in different sports say no to men in it. Mennonites, no. Men in their sports. Men in their sports. And this is an article I wrote about the LPGA, which is the Women's Pro Golf Association, who added a policy about being a female at birth. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat in there, which I don't like, but it effectively gets men out of their sport. They said that effective in 2025, athletes who are assigned female at birth are eligible for competitions. And this is all their elite competitions listed there. Now, I have a problem with this language being used. Assigned female at birth, it's ridiculous. It implies that you are assigned a gender and not just are one at birth, which is insane. But for some reason, even when they're saying we don't want men in our sport, they feel like they need to placate with this language. We admit there's a disadvantage against playing men. We admit that they're not women, but it's assigned female at birth. And what they end up saying is players assigned male at birth and who have gone through male puberty are not eligible. So I guess the LPGA is saying that if you take hormones or get a sex change before puberty, which is sick because that would be like before 12 or 13 years old, and you somehow grow up as a woman, like, then you can play in the women's events. But this isn't a real thing. You can't be born a male and then go through female puberty. That's not a thing. You are just pumping a body of a child full of chemicals and hoping they turn out a different way. You're really doing like an experiment on them. Like you're taking a male, you're pumping them full of hormones and hoping that their puberty turns them into a female somehow. It's really like if you were to say that about any other thing. We've got this male dog. We wish we bought a female dog. We're going to pump it full of hormones And maybe by the time it's 3, it's going to be more like a female dog. People would call you disgusting. And I wrote, as such, rules center around whether or not a child went through puberty as a boy or a girl, implying males could go through some sort of female puberty. And I agree with the writer, who's myself, and he's exactly right. The LPGA said it informed its policy through consulting top experts in medicine, science, sports physiology, golf, performance, and gender policy law. ESPN said they went through this for a year. I don't know. It's pretty crazy to me to think that there was some sort of intense study going on whether or not a man can, on average, drive a ball further than a woman. I don't particularly understand it, but I guess they sort of came to the right conclusion in the end. The tour admitted that males have advantages in the sport, but leaned to the fact that its working group advised that this is the case. This working group has advised that the effects of male puberty confer competitive advantages in golf performance compared to players. It's not us who said men have advantages in this sport. It's actually our scientific board and our physiologists and our gender policy law experts who said this, not us. This is science-based and inclusive. Why do you have to do this? Why can't you just say, it's unfair, we don't want it to happen? I get that you're trying to play both sides, but it doesn't work for most people. The people who disagree with you are going to disagree with you anyways, no matter how kindly to them you speak. And then there is this one guy who thinks he's a woman or wants to be a woman. Haley Davidson. He apparently missed the U.S. Women's Open by a single shot on the last. I think it was on the last hole. Could be wrong about that. And he's been going through home runs for like 3 years, and he's like, I'm a woman now. And he says, I can't say I didn't see this coming. I was banned from a tournament and the LPGA. All the silence and people wanting to stay neutral. Thanks for absolutely nothing. So he blames other people for not coming to his defense. What a great birthday present, having the greatest achievement I've earned in my life taken away from me. You're beating girls, dude. It's not, like, if that's your greatest achievement, that's sad. Fortunately, women and their tour went and did the right thing. He went on to say that he was the only active golfer affected by this, but he wasn't included in the study or anything like that. Yeah, because you're not actually a woman. So, sorry about that. We are moving on now to the government of Canada has banned a bunch more firearms and plans on giving the confiscated guns to Ukraine. Let's read on this from Quinn Patrick from True North. The Trudeau government announced yet another round of models that will be added to the gun ban list here in Canada, prohibiting another 300 firearms that were not included in its initial ban 4 years ago. Minister of Public Safety Dominic LeBlanc, which translates to the white racist, just kidding, said an additional 324 firearms will be added to the original 1,500 that were banned in 2020. These firearms can no longer be legally used, sold, or imported in Canada, he said. Should we see what he said?
Today, the government is adding a further 300.
Congratulations. The added measures, we don't need to see that. The added measures will also include donating some of the confiscated firearms to Ukraine. So it's okay that Ukraine has them, but not us. And this will become obviously clear as to why they want to give them to Ukraine in a moment. The Department of National Defense will begin working with the Canadian companies that have weapons that Ukraine needs and which are already eligible for the Assault Firearm Compensation Program in order to get these weapons out of Canada and into the hands of Ukrainian. So it's okay for Ukrainians to have them and to defend themselves, but if Canadians one day need to defend themselves against an invasion or a government, I don't think they're going to issue them to Canadians. I think they're going to be saying, too bad, this is how it works. Now, it will start to become clear, and by the way, we should mention this, their buyback program, which is the thing they did in Australia, it's the thing they want to do all over the place, they don't actually do anything. They haven't actually collected anything. Somebody just got tens of millions of dollars. Go read that on True North if you want, by what I'm guessing a beautiful French boy named Isaac Lamoureux. But let's look at some of the list of guns on come on now. Prohibited assault style firearms. This is the Canadian government website. And you're going to see we are back to square one here with the government in not making any sense. The government of Canada has taken further strong steps to tackle gun crime. Obviously, it's become very clear that this is not the reason. Listen to their insane verbiage here. As part of its comprehensive approach, on December 5th, the government announced the prohibition of more military-style, assault-style firearms. Of course, none of this is a thing. There's no such category as military-style weapons. There's no such category as assault-style weapons, except for in a video game and maybe colloquially, but there's no functional categorization of something to determine it being an assault-style rifle. You can't have an assault pistol, and they want you to believe this assault-style firearm. Maybe we need to get it in the streets and ask people about this before. There's an old video I did where I asked a guy about a weapon, and he was saying that a 40 caliber like what he was measuring the distance in which a bullet can fire by blocks, and he said something that's a certain caliber. I don't remember what it was, so I'm stumbling, but he said a 40 caliber means it can shoot 40 rounds, or it can go 40 blocks or something like that. It was one of the most ridiculous things we ever heard. But this is probably, I don't know, this is a person who wrote this that has no idea about anything about guns, or they're just doing what they're told and they have no soul. But more military style, assault style firearms is what they claim to be banning. But there's tons of things, I can show you here that they don't actually provide any actual reasoning behind it. Because they can't. Because there's no difference in any of the guns they're saying functionality-wise. They're just saying the scariest different ones. You can't differentiate between an assault-style weapon or anything else, because then they would have to stick to that definition. The only thing you can say by definition is automatic or semi-automatic, and that's already against the law. You can't have automatic weapons in Canada. It all has to be semi, and you have a bullet capacity limit. I believe it's 12 or 10 on some others, but over 919,000 non-restricted makes and models, and they're just like, there's still another 127,000 different variations of firearms that you're allowed to have. Why should you be bothered about this? So it'll become clear that they have targeted certain weapons so that they can say that they can give them to Ukraine for free. Because I'm going to go ahead and assume that nobody owns a Browning M2, which is World War II. So you will see on this list a ton of weapons from World War II, and I will show you pictures of some of them, because they just want to have these old weapons that they have and give them to Ukraine without having to sell them to them, without having to explain anything. Because why would you just nonsensically go around and ban all these World War II weapons? So how many people in Canada do you think actually own an M2 Browning? Probably none. So they want to be able to just give their old rifles to Ukraine. Do you think that anyone has an anti-aircraft Browning? No, they do not. And it goes on like this. An MP40, World War II. A Sturmwieger, otherwise and there's different names for this. A Gewehr, some places have called it. The STG, other places will call it. This is also a World War II. It's I guess you could call it an assault rifle. Maybe, sure. But this is made in World War II, German. We've also got an RPD, which is a Soviet machine gun. We can show you that one as well. I just want people to be clear that I know what I'm talking about, and the government has no idea what it's talking about. And the only conclusion we can come to here is that they want to give away these old-ass weapons that nobody actually has. How many people do you think have this Russian RPD-44 laying around? Or does Canada just have a bunch of old weapons that they want to give away? That's what that one looks like. They even include, if we go down the list here a little bit, to China. I don't know where the Beretta pistols fit in the assault rifle ban, but it's in there too. Then we go to just a Chinese service rifle, a Type 63. This is a World War II era rifle that I don't know who's going to have this. Did they bring it over? Did they buy it maybe for their collection? I don't know, but it's insane. A Type 68. If you play video games at all, you know what these are. Nobody actually has them. They're old, at this point, 80-year-old rifles. So if you're American and you're wondering why, I think the answer here that we've learned is that they just want to send a whole bunch of weapons to Ukraine and further disarm. You've got an M60. Nobody in Canada is owning these weapons. An auto pistol, is that in your assault and military style weapons? No. You already can't have automatic weapons in Canada. These are a bunch of sniper rifles that probably nobody owns. A SCAR, okay, that's a good rifle. I mean, if you agree with them, then that would make sense. But again, these are more MP40 pistols, Sturmgewehr, GSGs, G36. These are all weapons that very few people have. An HK 243, I believe, is going to be another weapon that you usually only find in a video game. They can't ban these on anything other by name because their bans in practice don't make any sense. They can't come up with anything that is, a tangible differentiation between different guns because they aren't smart enough, or they realize that it's really hard to do that. That's why whenever there's these sweeping bans, they just come up with some undefined term, military style, assault style rifles, and then the UMP, which is obviously not, for those of us who know, obviously not a assault rifle. And then there's pistols, and then there's sniper rifles, and all these things. And we can go on and on. There's an RPD is another machine gun. And they just pick a list. They just find a list of all the weapons that may have been released in the last couple of years. Here's a ton of Brownings, which are large machine guns, already banned. Like, you can't just go out and buy these. And they just say, oh, they're doing so good. We're doing so good about banning all these rifles, and we're going to give them to Ukraine. It's such a crock of shit that they're pulling over the Canadian people because they don't want you to get mad at them for sending the weapons to Ukraine. They don't want their base to get mad at them for saying, we promote these firearms. So we're taking away weapons from the bad guys in Canada, and we're giving them to the good guys. None of this will prevent any gun crime. There's barely any of it in Canada to speak with. You see the things that they confiscate, and they're like rusted old pieces of crap. Not even any 3D printed guns. This won't do anything. There are people who own some of these rifles, and they just want to slowly take it away from people. And they're hoping that when the next government comes in and they try to roll back these measures, they'll be able to say, look how unsafe you're making it. It's all completely dishonest. Like I said, the bans don't make any sense the way they write them. And it seems to me that they're trying to round up as many weapons as they can to provide to the Ukraine without having to say we're selling weapons to Ukraine. But it is insane to say you don't need them, but people in the Ukraine need them. It's bad for you to have them, but it's okay for Ukraine to have them because they're being used for war there. They're being invaded by somebody that's taking away their freedom, but we would never do that to you, so just give us your guns. That's the argument here, and it's actually insane. Let's go on over to some different sports news, and it's involving drugs. Yes, I said it. The NFL is allowing more than twice the consumption of, let's say, wacky tobacco than they have before. So what it says on their new substance abuse policy, let's bring it up here. This is by reporter Tom Pelissero, who posted this new policy from the NFLPA. It's hard to read, so we'll go back to the text here. But I just wanted to show you that he was the one who did it. And they've upped their level of THC in their blood sample from 150 nanograms to 350 nanograms per milliliter of blood. Now, I wanted to investigate how much that actually is. How much THC gets into your blood depending on how recently you've used, because colloquially, most people think that it stays in your blood system for about 30 days, and so anyone who ever uses it would be testing positive. So I used the reference from ncids.org, who used a study involving 6 subjects with reported peak THC levels in the blood between 46 and 188 nanograms per milliliter within the first 10 minutes. So what that means is that unless an athlete has ingested, I don't know what we can say on YouTube, the substance right before they're testing, it's still quite unlikely that they would test positive. And now, so this is a problem with roadside testing and drug tests for people when they're driving, is because most jurisdictions use a stupidly low level of like 5 nanograms per milliliter for a drug test. And then you're classified as impaired driving. But with this one, you know, it was up to 150, so there was a chance that you could test positive, and maybe the reason they upped it is because somebody did, but they actually increased it to 350, so you'd have to be smoking so much and then be drug tested immediately after in order for this to be a problem for you to test positive. They're effectively eliminating it without outright saying that it is allowed, which is, you know, is it silly? Are they placating somebody? Probably. I don't agree with that sort of methodology, but here we are. So, and unless they're just being like, smoke now, we're testing you while you're smoking, you're not going to get caught. But for my research, most of the roadside drug testing that they're doing is a much smaller. And this study said that anybody who smokes regularly or uses THC regularly is going to pop at a certain level. It's not a 350, but it's a level that would typically be, you know, means for arrest or suspended license, depending on this jurisdiction, if you're tested when you drive. So, because when they do take you down to the station and they blood test you for this type of substance, the vast majority of people are getting nowhere close to, you know, somewhere like this, 46 to 188 or even 350. And then they're like, what are we doing here? So they make it super low, which is also bad because now you're just getting people who may have smoked like 2 days ago, or they smoke regularly, but they're not like, imagine a person who drinks like, I don't know, 3 times a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then on Saturday they're driving and you pull them over and they're just like, I'm going to arrest you for drunk driving because you drank 4 days ago, and there's still like this tiny amount of blood alcohol in your system. That would be the equivalent, and that's what's going on here. So I think you might as well just outright ban it if you're the NFL. But here's a hilarious FAQ that apparently got sent out to all the players because they don't want them posting about their drug tests on social media. Let's see if we can make it bigger. Can I post a photo or video of the white slip notifying me of a drug test? No. Can I post screenshots of text messages with my drug tester? No. Can I post a photo, video, or audio from inside the drug testing room during collection? No. Was it previously against the rules to publicly post this? Yes, it was prohibited. However, there was no clearly defined disciplinary framework, which meant the league had the discretion to impose fines that could have exceeded $15,000. So they're saying, please don't post text messages with your drug tester on social media, which somebody must have done. And now it's a $15,000 flat fine. And another interesting thing they're doing is they're now testing NFL players for fentanyl, but it's not punishable because they know it's in a lot of their pain medication. So they want to test your levels, I'm guessing to make sure you're not addicted or using it when you shouldn't be, but it's not punishable. They will punish the players if they refuse a drug test, and it used to be you get suspended a game, I believe, if you didn't show up for the test or you didn't agree to it. Now it's $15,000, and it's another, I think, $30,000 if you refuse a second one. 45,000. A second missed test would increase the fine to 45,000, which is a change from the previous policy of a one-game suspension. So interesting stuff going on at the NFL. They're effectively making it okay for their players to smoke weed. I don't think a lot of people will have a problem with that. Concussion central over there. And they're testing them for mandatory testing for fentanyl use, but not fining them for having any amount in their system. Really strange, really interesting at the same time. Should we finish on Mike Tyson? Now, this is a rumor that Mike Tyson's been offered $700 million to fight Jake Paul in a rematch. And this is, of course, a big Saudi guy named Turki Al Sheikh, or Al Sheikh, I don't know. But he is allegedly giving him an offer of $700 million to fight in a, quote, air quotes, everybody, real fight with Jake Paul. So this Saudi guy, who is the chairman of the board of directors for the General Entertainment Authority in Saudi Arabia, he's the guy, or one of the guys, who pays boxers a shit ton of money to make these huge spectacles. It's completely not sustainable, but he's making another offer for Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Would it generate more than $700 million in revenue to be watched? I don't know. I doubt it. Is it worth it if you just generate like $100 million off of $700 million? Maybe. But I think the whole goal here is to make Saudi Arabia palatable to people, normalize it to people, and say, hey, it's not weird for us to go to this country where women can't drive without chauffeurs or without being monitored, and only in the daytime and this stuff. Maybe they're right about that, Patriots. I don't know. But the $700 million would only be given to Tyson if he was able to knock out Jake Paul within the first 3 minutes of the fight. I'm giving Mike Tyson $700 million if he agrees to fight Jake Paul, this time in a real fight, and wins by KO in a maximum of 3 minutes. So he is on the side that the first fight was thrown, or it had these stipulations that people like Michael Irvin are, saying they heard, which is that Mike Tyson couldn't throw uppercuts. He wasn't allowed to do that, and all these other things. And Mike Tyson wasn't actually trying, so maybe he's in agreement with that. But he wants to give him $700 million if he knocks out Jake Paul within 3 minutes. I don't know what happens. They could just split the money if Jake Paul takes a dive. Who knows anymore? It's so hard to tell. I happen to not think that the first fight was faked and staged. I think Mike Tyson is old, and after the first round where he looked like a real guy, time immediately caught up with him. He got rocked several times. And then Jake Paul showed mercy because he didn't want to kill him in front of everyone. Be like destroying his hero's legacy forever. And I think that's, if you want a conspiracy, that's the conspiracy. Otherwise, I think it went as expected. So we've got a lot of great stuff coming up for you. I want you guys to sign up at the Patreon, patreon.com/UOPod. Going to put out a video on there this week of me and Louis Brackpool from when he was down here in Canada, of us going around talking about homelessness and immigration and even video games in my hometown. It's a very interesting video. I want to give it to you just exclusively on Patreon. And then I think coming up next weekend, we will have an interview with a rapper who worked for Diddy. He explains what he saw at the Diddy parties. He explained some really creepy, Illuminati level stuff in the rap industry. You're not going to want to miss that. So that should be next weekend. An article is going to come out on The Blaze this week, I believe, if all goes according to plan. And then the podcast will come out this weekend. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Audio listeners, we love you. Don't forget to check in with the YouTube channel. It will be available on Spotify and Apple, of course, as long as they carry it on video, which I believe they both do now, if I'm not mistaken. I think Apple might as well, but Spotify definitely does, so you can watch it on there. That'll be next weekend. Sign up for the Patreon for the exclusive video this week. And remember, I wouldn't lie to you, except for maybe this once. Neil deGrasse Tyson, it's time to give it up.
it up, Jordan.